Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. There we are. So listen, Mita, it is absolutely wonderful to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Well, I am as well. I had a little panic attack earlier where because of the time zone differences, I hopped on and you weren't there. And I was going, oh my God,
I was late. You were cursing me, but here I am.
Well, I was going, you can't trust any bugger these days. And then, of course, it was me because it usually is.
I've done that. Yes.
So there we go. Right, so let's get straight into who you are. Somebody met you at a social event and went, ooh, what do you do? What would you say?
Gosh, I don't go to many social events, but let me pretend I'm at one. I would say I'm on a mission to fix what's broken in our workplaces, and I'm on a mission to raise kind and inclusive human beings, which is difficult today, and I think every generation of parents probably said the same thing.
So you are the author of two books. Yes. One is Reimagining Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Workplace with Wiley. Yes. And I'll make sure there's a link to that. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that. But you have a second book because you're just showing off now by bringing out a second one.
Oh, yes, here I was showing it off. There you go.
I know, look at that. Boom. And I love the title of this, The Devil Emails at Midnight. I mean, that's brilliant. What good leaders can learn from bad bosses, but I love that. The devil emails at midnight. So we'll get some real focus on that. I've only got one book. I had Dave Ulrich on the podcast, the HR guru, some years ago, and he said something like he's the author of, or part author of around 36 books or something like that. And I just thought, right, well, clearly while I'm watching telly, he's doing another book.
While I'm binging Netflix, yeah. He's on his 38th, yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
Wow.
I mean, that's the difference, isn't it? While I'm actually faffing about, he's cracking on.
Well, you bring an interesting point up, which is discipline, right? I always say, people ask me how I write books. Half of it is half art and the creativity behind it. And some might say I was born with an innate gift to write, maybe. But half of it's discipline and that consistency of showing up every day to do it.
I love that. And I've said this a few times on the podcast. Somebody said to me, actually, Guy, the one way of getting a podcast that has some, oomph to it is just keep doing them.
Yes.
Because most people won't have the discipline to continue. And if you just do a load, you just will get better. So,
listen, consistency is my underrated superpower. I keep saying consistency, just like for yourself and your show. Yes.
Yeah, I like that. And consistency, it's if you pick up the stick, you get both ends. So consistency at one end and discipline at the other end. Yeah. You probably can't have the one without the other, so I like that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to write that down.
Okay, good.
Well, and then I'll supply it as my own wisdom later on a workshop.
Yes.
And people will go, that's why he's worth the money. Yeah. So, I've only taken one thing away from this keynote, Guy: consistency and discipline.
Wonderful.
Okay. So let's get a little journey going and just have a sense of how, to understand where somebody is. I think it helps to understand where they've come from. Sure. So let's just get a little sense of that journey that has got you from being born up a mountaintop to where you are today. Yeah. It's good to get a sense of that journey.
I will evoke the Marvel origin story, which for me is I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. I was born and raised in the United States with my younger brother. And I grew up in a time and a place where it was not cool to be Indian. I was the funny looking, dark skinned girl who had a long, funny looking braid, whose parents spoke funny English until it wasn't funny anymore. And I was bullied a lot, both verbally and physically by my peers. I grew up outside of Boston. And at home, I had a wonderful home life. My parents had an unshakable faith and confidence in me that I would do great things, both for my brother and I. It was education at all costs. That was the way to economic opportunity, and they lived in survival mode for most of their lives, having immigrated here, and wanted to make sure that they gave us a different life. But that idea of, and whether it's you relate to my story in the specifics of it, we all can remember a time where we didn't feel like we belonged. Whether it was that kickball team, you didn't make it onto the soccer league, you weren't invited to a friend's birthday, you were left out of a work event, a wedding invite, we all can draw on that. And it's such a horrible feeling. And that has really driven me throughout my career. And when I was younger, I was both introverted and painfully shy. I didn't have a lot of friends. I read and wrote a lot. I watched a lot of commercials. I was obsessed with commercials, not actually TV. I love a good movie trailer. I spent a lot of time in the grocery store with my mom, really interested in who gets to be put on a cereal box and why, who gets to be on a billboard and movie. And I would always think who has the power of the pen? Whose stories matter? Whose stories don't matter? Why don't I see people more like me and stories? And so if you know that about me, that really drove me my entire life, just in terms of storytelling and the power of storytelling. But also this idea that no one should ever feel like they don't belong. And this idea that I would say, which leads me to the books, is that, wow, I never thought that those bullies from the playgrounds and classrooms would follow me into the conference rooms and hallways of corporate America. I was very naive, right? I thought I'd sort of left that behind. And then you realize you're entering a world of work in many ways wasn't built for someone like me. And so that's been my driving force and mission from a very young age, and leads me into our conversation here today.
I love that phrase, actually, origin story. I think that's a nice way of
you can write that down too. Yeah, someone else gave that to me. I won't take credit for that.
This is going to be the best podcast ever. I'm just going to walk away with takeaways. Do you know, and in a very different way, I'm Jewish, but not practicing. I happen to have been born into the Jewish faith, and that's literally as far as it goes for me. However, it was identified when I was at school, and I was called the Yid kid, and I was bullied remorselessly for a whole different reason. No, just stuff of life. Yeah. Stuff of life. But it's interesting. It could be, at one end, it could be skin color. At one end, it could be religion. At one end, it could be a disability. At one end, there's many reasons. It could be your height. It could be the fact that you're not that attractive looking as a kid. It could be, who knows what it is. But there's this whole set of truths for, your parents can't afford the posh, the new trainers. Doesn't matter. People are ostracized or alienated and feel isolated for a huge amount of reasons. And I think it's a very rare thing that actually there wasn't something for somebody at some point.
Yes. Yeah. And I love what you say. It is anything that I perceive to be different about you or someone else. It's anything that's different that you all of a sudden can sometimes make a target. I said to you earlier, if I was in a bar, one of the things, or at a party, how would I introduce myself? This idea of how you raise kind and inclusive human beings. For me, I don't believe the work of creating more inclusive cultures starts at our conference room tables. It starts at our kitchen tables. It starts at our homes and in communities. And so in many ways, we think about these things backward. We're racing to create these inclusive cultures at work. But, when we walk into the workplace, we come in with history and biases and how we were raised and what we think. And so a lot of it starts at our homes. And so I'm very particular with my children. I try to be. If somehow they talk about Mita is strange or funny or awkward or weird, or she speaks funny or acts, odd sometimes, whatever kids might say that are innocent. And then you have to sort of stop and say, well, tell me more. Why do you think that? Because I believe, innocent jokes and comments, it becomes the gateway to othering, stereotyping, and then eventually hate. Right. And so really to think about how we talk to younger people in our lives, and just to be aware of the language we're using and they're using.
So this is, I think, where it gets quite interesting. And, which is, I'm pausing to think here, which is, I think some things get hijacked. And they can take a good thing and turn it into something negative. So let's just take fitness, for example. Fitness is generally accepted as being a good thing. Now, one version of one person's fitness is another. But
Yeah.
if I was going to say what's fitness, it's your capability to probably live a healthy life
Sure.
and, in essence, live a life in a manner that doesn't stop you from doing things you want to do, and you don't pay for it later. Because
Yes.
you're fine to crack on there, but you died of a heart attack when you were 45 because you kept eating, big breakfasts or something. So whatever. And then what you have is there's a kind of a balance for most people, and then you've got influencers who are looking super lean, super fit, and actually it turns out they're taking this and they're taking that, and they're not real, but they're giving so actually that gets hijacked.
Yes.
And it puts a stress, and it actually makes something less palatable because of the few that have monetized it, turned it into an industry, and even though it might be rooted in truth, it's been infected. Now, and I don't think anything escapes that, frankly.
Yes.
So I don't think it's even about this topic, but I think it's an inherent truth that once people latch onto it, there's a distribution curve of humanity,
Sure.
and there's always going to be somebody that does this kind of thing with it. So where does this topic get hijacked, do you think?
I love that analogy. Wow. I'm going to write that down now. I'm writing it down. That was really, I'm thinking about that. Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting in the US right now. There's global ramifications. I know every part of the world is dealing with it a different way, but it is it's the woke, the anti-woke, the political, the apolitical, diversity, equity, inclusion, DE&I. We're not allowed to say that anymore. And
you couldn't not say it at one point, and now we're not allowed to say it.
Yes, now you can't say it. And I think there's, for me, two things come to mind is that we've lost the plot when it comes to inclusion in the workplace. And I like how you're talking about the extremes and where we can go. If I work for you, I come to work for a paycheck. Some of us have found a mission and purpose. I want to be seen, recognized, valued. I want to make sure that my contributions matter. Your job as a leader in the company is try to create an environment where I have the ability to reach my potential there and I can do my best work, full stop. And that's for everybody, not just for some people, but a workplace for everyone. And we know a lot of things get in the way. And it's interesting when I talk to founders and CEOs and they'll say, well, and I coach them routinely, oh, this seems really political. This seems woke. I can't talk about this. I can't address this. And all of these things we think about, Black Lives Matter, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-LGBTQ legislation, xenophobia. I can go on hurt and harm happening across the world. And if you actually knew someone from that community, you would never say that this is politics, right? You would say, gosh, I have a friend who's in this community who's being harmed this way, and I'm learning more about their lived experience. Wow, I didn't know that. And all of a sudden you care. It's very different, right? It's very easy to other and put something really far away from you and say, well, that's politics. And really, it's in many cases life and death. And in many cases, it's about hurt and harm. And so I hope more of us are on a journey to just get access to a lived experience that isn't our own. There's a lived experience you don't know about. I want to know more about this. I, years ago, was really embarrassed that I was born and raised in the United States, and I didn't know anyone who was a veteran. I didn't know anyone who had served in our armed forces. And I was like, that's embarrassing. Like, I should know more about what it's like to have served and be a veteran. And so I'd gone to one of our employee resource groups at this company, and they had connected me with a nonprofit that helped veterans transition into corporate jobs in the US. And so I became a mentor there for a few years because I wanted to help guide and learn. So there's many ways to do this. And you might say, well, I can't learn about every lived experience. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, think about one or two things that you're curious about. And you say to yourself, well, I have no idea what it's like to be Mita or that person. And I'd like to gain some understanding.
I love that. I think that for me, there's something about, I seem to remember, I'm 56, which I know you find remarkably difficult to believe, but I'm 56. And for those of you not watching on a video, I look like I'm 26, but I'm 56.
I was going to say 21, I remember, but yes.
Bingo. And I remember a decade ago, maybe a little bit longer, I'm not even sure. I could be on a train and I could strike up a conversation with somebody, and I had no anxiety about any form of conversation that we may have. And we would agree, disagree, and then we'd part. We go, well, a lovely chat, lovely to admit, la, la, la. Now,
Yes.
no, no, it's not like that at all now. If you, I mean, I'm sure it is with certain people, but the risk of somebody losing their shizzle very, very quickly is so. And that's because I think there's something about, call it social media, call it whatever you want.
Sure.
The root cause could be one of a few things. But there is something where I think the biggest issue isn't the issue, because we're talking about this issue, perhaps. Sure. It's actually protecting the conversation rather than taking a position. You may have a position.
Yes,
but what I notice is that people want to win the argument. And what that does is it leads to extremes, which means actually, I think the one thing that if you think it should be blue and I think it should be green, actually, let's both agree on having a high quality conversation. And I think that's the unifying point that is required for these kind of conversations, which I love that. Let's protect the conversation regardless of our position. Does that resonate with you?
It does, and we have lost the ability to disagree with kindness and respect, not just at the conference room table, but at the kitchen table. And I evoke the famous Stephen Covey quote, which is begin with the end in mind. My unpopular opinion is we should not be having these conversations in the workplace if we are not adults and prepared to have the conversation, which means you sit next to me at work and I want to talk to you about the recent election. And if I am entering that conversation, recent US election, which is not so recent anymore because we are several months into the next administration, but many months in. But if I enter this conversation thinking that I want to shame, blame, name, demonize you, I want to say, I'm right, you're wrong, like my kids do. I'm right, you're wrong. No, it is because I want to learn about, like you said, the quality of the conversation. Let's protect the conversation. Let me learn something different about you. Let me get a window into your experience, because behind every value and belief we hold, every vote we make, there is a story behind that. And so isn't that interesting to understand what that story is and what led you to that decision? And for me then to say, we're going to agree to disagree. Thank you for sharing your perspective and move on. Most of us can't do that. And I always say, like, abort quickly. If it's going down, if it's spiraling, you say, I'm going to end it right here. I appreciate you sharing. I have an email. I have a meeting. I need to
abort quickly.
Abort, right? Just hit that button and run, because it's not going to end well. And this is why companies don't want us having these conversations at work, because they think many of us can't even do it with our families at the holiday table when we're all getting together, never mind at work, where with your family, you might get together a few times a year and then you're like, bye, see you later. If I'm getting into arguments with you and you're sitting right next to me, I'm seeing you every day or seeing you on Zoom. It's not that easy. Not that easy.
Yeah. No, I think that concept of psychological safety is very much around, for me, the ability for us to have a conversation.
Yes.
And for me to walk away better for it, even if I think you're completely bonkers.
Right. And if you feel that you aren't ready to do that at work, don't do it. Right? Don't do it. Just don't start it if you're not in that place where you're saying you're ready to hear and accept and try to appreciate a different perspective. Because people might say, that perspective is hurting and harming me. I can't. Okay, well then don't enter that conversation right now. Just don't do it at work.
So there's a lot going on there, which, a lot of these conversations I have with people on the podcast, I go, with a bottle of wine and a pizza, we could be here for some time.
Yes, we could.
Because it's a huge topic with many rabbit holes we could go down. And, there's something about societal truths. There's something about cultural truths. There's so many little jigsaw pieces to these topics that in some respects, it's what makes it so interesting, but also what makes it very difficult to navigate, because there's lots of icebergs to kind of to kind of get around. So in the context of inclusion,
yes,
if somebody came up to you and said inclusion, they kind of nodded, and they went, look, I've read some books, and I've read your book, I've been on courses, and it's very complicated, and it's almost a little bit the curse of knowledge, isn't it? There's a little bit of a point where not knowing anything means you can't have an opinion, and then you know a lot, and then you've got a lot of opinions. So there's a weird thing about this. But if you were going to say, listen, this is a topic with some complexity, and of course with more time, we could have a bigger conversation. But in a nutshell, if you want to have inclusion in your family, or inclusion in your team, or inclusion in your workplace, ... what would you say, factoring in that there's a lot more that could be said?
I'll go back to what we said earlier. I'll say two things, which is that you want people to do their best work at work. What kind of environment are you creating? Do they feel seen? Do they feel recognized? The worst times in my career is when I've gone into a job and I'm like, does my boss even know that I exist? Do they make time for me? Which goes to the devil emails at midnight, the boss who never made time for me, except when she dumped her inbox from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. That was the only time she had for me. So there's that piece. Does this person know that the company cares about them and that they have a place here and that they can actually contribute? Like, you hired me to do a job, let me do the job. I think that's important. I also think stories have the power to move people. So when I work with leaders, I say, what's a time when you didn't feel like you were included? Anytime. Just let's stop and think about that. How did that make you feel? What do you remember about that moment? What do you observe? If you could go back to that moment and do something different, would you have? And then who else was around that observed this happening? Did you wish that someone else would have intervened on your behalf and said something, right? Because it's always easy to say, how did you feel, right? Would you have changed anything if you could go back? In many cases, when we felt that we weren't included, there was at some point, whether it was at the playground or at a conference room table, there were power dynamics at play. And usually the person who's being excluded isn't the person who has the most power in the room, generally. And so I always am very curious about what's everyone else doing. It reminds me of the New York City subway. When you see something, say something, right? If something is happening in the workplace to someone else, are you going to speak up, or are you going to continue to watch it happen? I hate that the burden is placed on the person who's experiencing it. I mean, I've been there many times in my career, and I really hope that we spend too much time at work to not look out for each other. That's it.
It's very interesting that in a time like this where words have to be used so we know what we're talking about, and then a word gets empowered usefully or unusefully.
Sure.
And had a meaning, like woke meant something positive, and then it went negative. And some people have been in on the topic from the start and have followed the journey. Others come to it and actually they don't know the history. And others,
yes, they don't know.
And because it's, like anything in life, if I talk to somebody in the workshops that I run or on coaching, some people, I didn't really know about that, and other people are all over it. So it's an interesting thing, I think, about sometimes if you use a word because the word empowers you. I think there are words like, somebody might feel alienated, they may feel isolated, they might not have a sense of that was fair. It may not have been kind the way that person was treated. Does that person, etc. So I think one of the things I'm very keen to do is to say, this is the language of the topic, but it may not be the words that you need to use.
Yes.
Because if they come preloaded for other people, then utilizing them serves nobody. If your intent is to be of service and not to win, I think when you want to win, you want to use the words, and I want you to agree that those are the right words. If I come with good intentions, then actually I know what I'm referencing, but I may use words that actually don't then trigger, which is a new word that we now use, but actually I'm using it in the old version of it. They just don't trigger a reaction, regardless of being triggered, inverted commas, because actually you don't need to use the vocabulary. And I think I liken that to giving somebody feedback. You can say, I want to give you feedback because you want them to know that they're getting feedback. I can also just have a conversation with you what I've seen, and I don't need to use the word feedback because I know you may not respond very well to it. That might
trigger, especially in the workplace.
Yeah, so I think there is a maturity for me that is, the start is to understand the topic and know the words because you need a point of reference. But I think the adultness is in our ability to talk about it and not necessarily hang on or signpost everything through a language which in itself can be its own problem. How does that sit with you?
It makes a lot of sense. We can chat GPT and Google and research all the things we want. And if we don't understand the language and we start to use it, it's going to come off as very inauthentic, very disingenuous, can backfire. And so use words that you're comfortable with as you're trying to explain. And particularly if you come with good intentions and really think about the impact you're trying to make, most people will understand if you're curious and honest and open. And even to say, I've said this before, I don't have the right words. Here's how I'm feeling about this situation. And I'd love for your thoughts. Like, even to be that vulnerable, to say, I'm checking in on a team member. I saw this happened in the news. I know your community's been impacted. I don't know what to say. I don't have the right words. If you need me, if I can do anything, I'm here. If you want to take a few hours off, if you want to grab a cup of coffee. And I wish we had more vulnerability in the workplaces where we could actually say that. Like, I don't have the right words. I don't know what to say, except I want you to know my intention is that I'm hurting for you, or I'm curious about this, or I'm sad, or I'm angry, whatever that is. And just to be open and honest about it.
I think if things are true, they're inherently true. They may be true with this topic, but let's say somebody's had somebody pass away, or they've just been told that actually, if something's the right way of approaching somebody, if, for example, somebody in the family's got very ill or passed away, I may not have the words, but I want to show good intention.
Yes,
so actually to approach somebody and go, I'm probably going to use all the wrong words in all the wrong order, but my intention is just to show that I.
Yes.
So these mechanisms aren't necessarily topic specific. They're just the inherent truth of approaching somebody with good intention. And you're right. I think the inherent truth of being vulnerable with, listen, hey, I'm trying to demonstrate. So even if my vocabulary is a trigger, you look to my intention, and I've pre-contracted with you in a very social way just to say, hey, listen, this may already be a problem from the way I'm going to offer it.
Absolutely.
But,
yes.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Okay, so first of all, I want to move into your new book, but Reimagining Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Workplace. I think that's available on Amazon, and I think that is worth a look at. I think this is a huge topic, and I didn't get you on really to talk about per se inclusion, but I think just having somebody with your kind of insight, it's worth 27 minutes. I'm just looking at my clock of anybody's time just to hear you sort of talk around it.
Thank you.
And I think the learning of a topic is fine. I think, the I come in peace, and I had my intention.
Yes, yeah.
One of the phrases I heard somebody say to me was, who's it for? Who are you doing that for?
Wow.
And I think that's a really, just before we transition out of this, I think that's a very powerful perspective, because actually, if it's because you want to win or prove a point or gets, actually, is it for the other person? Because if it's for you, you're not ready to, don't do it yet.
Don't do it yet. I talk about this in Reimagining Inclusion in my first book, the equation of intent versus impact. Sometimes we get so wrapped up, exactly what you're saying. The intent is, I want to do this for you. I have good intentions. I know this is going to make your life better. I. And I don't really think about how the impact's going to land, because I'm so focused on me and less about you, if I'm going to be honest. And I see this happen in the workplace all day long. I'll give you a very quick example, which is I worked with a leader on this. There was a stand-up team meeting every Monday at 8 a.m. And one of the vice presidents, she came to me and says, the CTO has this meeting every Monday at 8 a.m., but I have to drop my son off at school, and I don't want to do this meeting. And so I was like, well, go and approach him and talk to him about it. And his solve was to say to her, intent, impact, don't come to the meeting. It's totally fine. I'll send you the notes afterwards. It's easier for him to keep it at 8. But what did that make her feel like? Well, no, I want to come to that meeting. I didn't say I didn't want to come. I just said, this doesn't work for my schedule. Can we move it? And so there's so many examples of that where the intent, and I actually am thinking I'm doing something good for you. Well, no, it's okay. Don't worry about this meeting. Yes, of course. Go drop your son off at school. You can look every week at the Google Doc and get the notes. And she says, well, no, I actually want to be in this meeting. My team's also there. I need you to move it. And oh, by the way, I'm not the only one who can't make this time. So examples like that all the time. And I love that you brought that up in that question. Who are we doing it for is so important. And if it's just for us, game over, pause, reset, and be ready to think about the impact of the other person before you start the conversation or take whatever action you're thinking of taking.
Yeah. And I think asking somebody, what do you want to have as an outcome, doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it does mean I'm going to ask.
Yes.
Because I might give you all of it. I might give you a percentage of it. But actually, even if I say, okay, I get it. No. What I have done, though, is demonstrated that I've shown interest and I'm curious and I'm trying to make sense of your perspective. And I think some people fear asking because then they think they've got to do it. And I think that's the maturity step. The asking, what do you want, has nothing to do with the fact that you're going to get it. But it is, as long as it's genuinely curious and with the intention that if I can, I will. However, if I can't, we'll have an honest conversation about it. That's okay.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like most of our workplaces, they're not democracies. Neither is my household as a parent. It's not a democracy. Like, you take the feedback, and it's also, that is the job of the leader. That's the hard job. Yes. You hear things you don't want to hear.
When did this become a democracy?
When it's not I said that to my son the other day. This is not a democracy. I'm sorry, not in our household. So, right, I'll take the feedback and I will evaluate it. And yes, it's so important. I want to understand how this might impact you, because it actually might change the decision I make, because I wasn't putting myself in your shoes. I wasn't thinking about how you might react to this very good deed. Very, very good deed I thought I was doing.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe one of the biggest things is the psychological safety, the emotional safety to say, you offering is going to have one of three things happen. It'll reinforce my position, yes or no. I'll calibrate my position, or there'll be a yes or no. And I think that's okay. Yeah. And I think there's a clarity and an openness in not confusing me offering it with a no, meaning I've not been heard.
Yes.
As long as I can demonstrate to you have been heard, I call it giving somebody a damn good listening to. Absolutely. Which is this idea of you feeling heard. And actually that becomes extra important if the likelihood is I'm going to say no.
Yes.
Okay, very interesting. So let's move on. Like I had anything to do with it. You have a book coming out.
Well, you have me on your show, so thank you to discuss.
Bingo. It. Yeah, exactly. I think September.
Yes, September 30th.
I think. Yeah, September the 30th. The Devil Emails at Midnight, best title ever. What good leaders can learn from bad bosses. Now, why would I get interested in that? Why would I go onto Amazon and pre-order?
I've been a bad boss, and chances are so have you. And I think too much of the conversation, and I've been part of it, about how we fix what's broken in our workplaces is, how do you survive the toxic boss? How do you survive the toxic workplace? The number one direct message I get from people, the DM, is usually a painful story of something that's happening to them at work. And then how do I survive this situation and this boss and what I'm going through? And I had this moment where I thought to myself, but what if we are the person who's causing hurt and harm? And in the book, I have extreme versions. I have 13 archetypes. I include myself. I have extreme versions of 3 bosses who really affected my mental health. Some of these individuals, though, my toxic habit is micromanaging, which could swing back and forth. And so if we each thought about, well, what if I looked in the mirror and I am the person who has a toxic habit who's showing up at work? And what if we all have one toxic habit, one bad habit? How does that impact our workplaces? And so I would love the conversation to shift for leaders to have more ownership on how they're showing up versus us all trying to scramble and survive the leader or endure it, which I've definitely had to do.
One of the more senior the people that I work with, as has happened over the years, what's very interesting, of course, is when you're right at the top of that food chain, you have a lot of things telling you that you're right.
Yes.
And the chances are you are right more often than not,
sure,
because that's why you got there. And one of the things I have is this idea of however, which is, think of somebody that you really, really like and you go, Bob's fantastic. However, you've got to be careful around, everybody's got a however.
Yeah, we all do.
Even the person that you really think is awesome, you go, oh, she's absolutely amazing. However, just be careful when it's the end of the month, when it comes to the profit and loss, because she does get, however, just, when his kids are staying at home, and he can be a little bit, it doesn't matter, but we've all got a however, and to presume that you haven't is a massive level of probably self-reflection. So there's something about, if I read this book, which I can't read yet, but when I do read this book, the chances are I'm going to recognize elements of myself. Probably, if each one had a sliding scale of 0 to 10, whatever that might look like, the chances are I'm going to go, probably not. But even if it's occasionally,
that's the point.
There's going to be things in there.
Yes. And I only go through 13 bad bosses. There's more, right? Of course there's more. People read this and you didn't do this, you did. Yeah, of course. That's the whole point. You can then start thinking about the things I didn't include. And that's the conversation, to say, I've read this, now I'm thinking about the one thing I need to work on, and then to share it with someone else that works with you, works on your team, and then start to think about, it's not boiling the ocean, but what are things you're going to do, one thing every day, to think about how you're going to monitor how you're behaving in the workplace.
And that can be book 2, another 13.
Yes, it will. Maybe it will be. There we go. I'll write that down. Sequel.
The sequel, another 13. So, if I read this book, how is it created in terms of perspective? Is it part narrative? Is it facing into each one of the 13 with things to deal with, or to reflect on? What will I experience when I read it?
So when I was constructing the book about 1.5 years ago, and this is still true in the marketplace today, nonfiction sales, I think now, are even more in decline. Fiction skyrocketing from a reading perspective, for all the reasons that you would suspect. People are looking for escapism for all the things that are happening in our world today. And so I wanted to write a business book that would draw people in a different way. My first book was serious and funny and was clickbait for a reason, and well-researched. This book is also well-researched, but it's also drawing people in with stories. I mean, The Devil Emails at Midnight, a title like that in the nonfiction section, you're like, what? Even the cover, right, evokes like, wow. And so I wanted people to pick it up and read it. And so every chapter opens with the story of a bad boss I once upon a time endured. I've changed all the details. I don't want to shame people or blame people or name them. I mean, I'm sure many of these people are now good leaders, and I hope so. But I share a pretty hilarious or heartbreaking story. And then we go into so what do we do about this? Why does this happen? Why do we micromanage? Why do we macromanage? Why do we let disengaged employees stay? How does this affect our workplaces? So it is a business book ultimately. But this idea of, I think, how do we bring more powerful storytelling into the world of business to get people interested in reading business, and to walk away and say, I learned something, and now I'm going to actually show up to work to try to do better and be better.
What are the 13? Are you able to kind of walk me through without going into every one, because obviously time wouldn't allow us to do so, but can you list the 13 for me?
Yeah, I can read the table of contents. Should we do that quickly?
That would be awesome.
Okay. Chapter 1, the boss who never had time for me except at midnight. Chapter 2, the boss who didn't want to call me by my name, so he renamed me Muhammad. That's about microaggressions in the workplace.
The boss is that microaggression or just downright aggression?
Racist, right? I'll say microaggression, but we're racist and completely offensive and inappropriate. Yep. The boss who fell asleep in almost every meeting. The boss who hovered like a helicopter and enjoyed redoing all of our work. Chapter 5, the boss who cried wolf because everything was urgent. Chapter 6, the boss who ruled with fear, perched on her throne, clutching tightly to her crown. This is the boss who threw a Chanel shoe at my colleague. True story. Chapter 7, the boss who punished me for being pregnant. Chapter 8, the boss who is incredibly kind and completely incompetent at his job. Chapter 9, the boss who is filled with toxic positivity. Chapter 10, the boss who loved gossiping about everyone. Chapter 11, the boss who loved the spotlight and took credit for all of the work. Chapter 12, the boss who questioned my loyalty and called me a rat. He's called Tony Soprano. All the bosses have nicknames in the book for a reason. And chapter 13 is me, the boss who was grieving and couldn't show up for her team. I talk about when I lost my dad suddenly in 2017 and the impact that had on me and my team.
I think that's those are some cracking titles. I've got this horrible fear that apart from the last one, it's all the same person.
Yeah. Sure. No, well, actually, they're all different people. But yeah, I didn't nickname myself. When you read it, you'll see. But
Quite right. So if Mita, tell me about then, because I'm, I think I'm all over this. I can't wait to get stuck into it. But tell me about your working life in the sense of just, if people wanted to interact with you.
Sure.
What would they reach out to you specifically for?
Well, hopefully you get the book, The Devil Emails at Midnight, What Good Leaders Can Learn from Bad Bosses, Amazon, independent bookstore, wherever you buy books. You can find me on LinkedIn. I actually really like meeting new people, so DMs are great. And mitamallick.com. Yeah.
And what is it that I would interact with you for? Not how would I do it? What would I be? Is it workshops? Is it coaching to bring to a life why I would engage with you?
Sure. I'm a workplace strategist, so I do a lot of executive one-on-one coaching. I do a lot of group coaching. I do a lot of work with exec teams, workshops, keynotes, wide range of offerings that I have.
And you're based where?
In New Jersey, the great state of New Jersey in the U.S.
So listen, I'm going to put all contact details. Did you say your website?
mitamallick.com. Yes.
Okay, and we'll make sure that's all connected and there for you. So listen, this has been, I think, a great sense of two books, both of which I think are valuable enough for me to want to get you on the podcast and talk about. I think you're very engaging. I think it's clear that you've got an energy and an insight into this topic, which I think really resonates. So I've really enjoyed that. So for me and for everybody that's listening, Mita, I just want to say thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
That's it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Please tell other people, help spread the word. Interested in working with me? Go to livingbrave.com, hop onto LinkedIn, Guy Bloom, and of course, even buy the book, Living Brave Leadership at amazon.com. Take care.